backside of your note sheet. It's a passage that I go to often whenever I'm thinking about God's blessings and His prosperity that He promises to us. If you've been around me for a while, you know this is a key passage whenever I talk about finances. I believe it's that important. Check it out. God says, will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how do we rob you? In tithes and offerings. Did I just lose my mind? He says, but how do we rob you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, the whole nation of you, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. In the Bible, this passage has the biggest blessings promised. It also has the most specific requirement given. Bring the tithes, he says, into the storehouse, so there may be food in my house, and then I will pour out so much blessing you can't contain it. Now listen. Because I'm in a church, I'm a pastor of a church, because I'm standing up here and teaching, there are a lot of people who would be skeptical about my motives when I talk about tithing. And I'm aware of that. I would always be skeptical because what I just told you sounds an awful lot like that internet scam. I'm doing all right. I follow a certain principle. You can follow that principle too. And what you need to do is you need to give money. Right? It sounds an awful lot like that internet scam. But I'm going to tell you 3 quick things that outline how this principle is different from any other internet scam and how it works out in practice. The first thing that we need to recognize is that this church is committed to doing what that passage says. You bring the tithes into the storehouse for the purpose of putting food in God's house. Now what does that mean? What does having food in God's house really mean? You have batteries there? We'll take a little break. We are so electronically advanced. It's coming. It's coming. We got a second sound guy back there today, so Robert's going to take care of it. See the little blinking green light? Woo-hoo. 6. Testing. All right, good. One of the things we need around here is batteries. So, providing food in God's house. Actually, I'm not really joking too much. When it says provide food for God's house, for bringing food into God's house, there were 3 things in the ancient Israelite culture that meant. Of course, number 1, it meant to have food there for the poor. To have food in the temple area or in the storehouses, wherever they were in the cities throughout Israel, so that the poor people could come, like a food pantry. That was part of it. That was a part of it. But there are 2 other things that this food references. Number 1, it also references the Levites, the priests and the Levites, whose job it was to take care of the service of worship in the country. So that means they were the ones who performed the sacrifices. They were the ones who lit up the lamps in the temple. They were the ones who baked the bread that would sit on the table in the temple. There we go. They would sit on the table in the temple. It was called the showbread, and there was always supposed to be a fresh piece of bread every single day on there. And so they were the ones who baked that. So the Levites and the priests were the ones who did the stuff for God. And they only got their food from the sacrifices and the offerings that people brought to the temple. So food in God's house meant that the people who were working there could be fed. And it also meant to have actual, literal food for God. You see that bread? Someone had to make it, but someone had to bring the flour for them to make it. Or the sacrifices. They had to do a sacrifice every every morning and every night on every day of the week. And then on the Sabbath day, they had to do extra sacrifices. And so you needed to have lambs and bulls and birds and all kinds of stuff that you could do the sacrifices with. And those had to come from somewhere. So when God says, bring these things, bring the tithes, bring the first fruits, the first 10%, the first portion of your harvest to the temple, to the storehouses, so there may be food in the house, they're talking about these three things. And I want to let you know, that's what we're trying to do. The second principle from this church is that we make our books open at request. We're not going to tell you who gave what amount of money, and we're not going to tell you if we gave specific aid to a person in need. We're not going to tell you those things, but we will let you see everything else. You know, where the money's coming from, where the money's going, and you'll find out, I hope it will be very clear, that we invest our money in people who take care of things. We'd like to hire some more staff, of course, that would be great. We invest in the actual stuff of worshiping God too, like batteries and facility rentals and stuff like that. We invest in the components of the worship of God, and then we also invest in people who are needy. So I've said those things to hopefully let you know that I'm not just trying to get your money away from you into this church. The third thing is that as far as we're concerned, Lafayette Community Church and me personally, you can give your money elsewhere. I think it's so important for you and me to get in line with God's principles and His plan in this world, that even if it takes you giving somewhere else so that you can feel good that you're not necessarily being coerced into giving here, I think you should do it. Of course, it's my conviction, it's my belief that I need to be given to that place where I worship God regularly, where I connect with Him. I need to be giving primarily there. And so if you share that conviction, I would encourage you when the offering basket comes by later on today to go ahead and give generously and to, as soon as possible, shoot your goals for at least that 10% minimum, because God made a promise, I didn't. And I'll just encourage you to test Him on it. He says test me. So there's one last Old Testament principle. This goes quickly. And it's that wise diligence brings prosperity. Wise diligence brings prosperity. Proverbs 10:4 says, lazy hands make a man poor, but diligent hands bring wealth. This is where the internet scams really get people. Because there are some people who have worked hard and they haven't experienced great prosperity. So they're thinking maybe there's a secret out there. Let me just show you this. Go ahead and put it on up there. I've got a picture coming up here from my own personal website.